The HVAC technician found the device taped inside the ductwork. It wasn't a faulty sensor. It was a camera. And for 16% of homes that get swept, that's the moment everything changes. This technician wasn't looking for a secret. He was answering a routine service call about a noisy fan. But what he discovered in the vent wasn't just a violation of privacy. It was the first thread of a conspiracy hiding in plain sight inside the home of a man who thought he was safe. This is the new reality of intimate partner surveillance. Spy cameras, cheaper than a takeout meal and designed to vanish into your home, are turning trusted spaces into live-streamed prisons. But this case was different. The husband hadn't installed it. The wife swore she knew nothing. So who was watching? And what did they want with a live feed from inside the vents of a seemingly ordinary house? To understand the violation, you first have to see the life that was being watched. Mark and Alina Torres had just celebrated their 3rd anniversary in the suburban home they bought together. Mark worked in logistics. Alina was a freelance graphic designer. They were the couple who hosted barbecues, who argued about whose turn it was to take out the recycling, who dreamed of converting the spare room into a nursery. The kind of ordinary life that feels invisible, until the day it wasn't. The first sign was the noise, a persistent, low hum from the bedroom vent that started one Tuesday in March. Alina joked it sounded like a bee was trapped in the walls. Mark, handy but not an expert, poked around the grate but saw nothing. After a week of sleepless nights, he called Apex Climate Control for a routine service. The technician, a guy named Leo with 20 years of experience, arrived at 10 a.m. Leo's process was methodical. He checked the external unit, the thermostat, the filters. The hum, he theorized, could be a failing bearing in the blower motor deep in the attic ductwork. He set up his ladder in the master bedroom closet, where a small access panel led into the maze of sheet metal. Mark waited downstairs, scrolling through his phone, thinking about a $50 service fee. Up in the dark, dusty channel, Leo's headlamp beam cut through the gloom. He found the blower assembly. The bearings were fine, but just past them something caught the light. A small black rectangular object about the size of a matchbox was secured to the top of the duct with a strip of industrial-grade gray tape. Wires snaked from it, not into the HVAC system, but through a tiny, drilled hole in the duct wall, heading toward the interior of the house. Leo knew immediately. In his 2 decades, he'd found toys, pet toys, and once a family of raccoons. He'd never found this. He carefully detached it. It was a pinhole camera, its lens no bigger than the tip of a pen. And it was warm, still powered. He climbed down, the device in his gloved hand, and found Mark in the kitchen. "You have a security system?" Leo asked, his voice neutral. Mark looked up. "Just the doorbell camera, why?" Leo placed the small black box on the counter. "This was in your bedroom duct, pointed downward. It's not part of any HVAC system I've ever seen." Mark stared, his brain refusing to connect the dots. A camera in the vent above their bed. The world seemed to tilt. Alina was out running errands. He remembered the research he'd casually glanced at: 1 in 4 women, 1 in 7 men. The statistic was no longer abstract. It was a warm black box on his granite countertop. The police report filed that afternoon was clinical. Item: 1 wireless pinhole camera. Location: master bedroom HVAC duct. Status: active power source unknown origin. The responding officer was sympathetic but blunt. Without proof of who placed it, there was little to do but file the report. He suggested they sweep the house. That phrase, *sweep the house*, made Mark's skin crawl. They called a specialist the next day. The firm, Sentinel Security, charged $2,000 for a full technical surveillance countermeasures inspection. A team of 2 arrived with suitcases of equipment: spectrum analyzers, thermal cameras, nonlinear junction detectors. They worked for 6 hours. Alina stayed at her sister, too shaken to be in the house. Mark watched, silent, as the technicians marked locations with little blue stickers. By sunset, they had mapped the network. The bedroom camera was not alone. They found a second device, identical in the living room vent, aimed at the sofa and the main entryway. A third was hidden inside a malfunctioning smoke detector in the hallway, its lens peering through a modified hole. All were wireless, transmitting on a frequency that piggybacked on the tour's own Wi-Fi network. All were powered by tiny batteries with estimated lifespans of 6 months, meaning they had been installed recently. And all fed into a single, encrypted receiver that was no longer in range. The lead technician, a former intelligence officer named David, laid out the findings in Mark's living room. "This is professional-grade targeting," he said. "The placement is strategic for coverage, not random. The ductwork installs are clever, excellent signal propagation through the house and physically hidden from casual view. Someone wanted to see and hear everything. Main living spaces, private spaces, choke points." Mark asked the question that had been freezing his blood for 24 hours. "Who?" David hesitated. "In my experience, installations this intimate, this comprehensive, usually aren't done by strangers. They're for control, for knowledge. We see it in high-conflict divorces, custody battles, obsessive ex-partners. The goal is to strip away any sense of privacy, to have total awareness. The data could be used for blackmail, for psychological manipulation, or simply to maintain a feeling of omnipresence." Alina was the obvious first thought. Did she have a secret? Was she being threatened? But when Mark, heart-pounding, called her to the house to hear the report, her reaction was not guilt. It was pure, unadulterated terror. She collapsed onto the sofa, sobbing, repeating, "He found me." The story spilled out in fractured pieces. An ex-boyfriend from before Mark. A man named Colin. Their relationship had ended 4 years ago, but not cleanly. He'd shown up at her workplace once, sent dozens of emails from anonymous accounts that just said, "I'm watching." She'd gotten a restraining order. She thought he'd moved on. She thought she was safe. The pieces seemed to snap together. A violent, obsessive ex, a classic motive. The police were re-engaged, the restraining order file pulled. Colin was located living 2 states away. When detectives contacted him, he was belligerent but provided an alibi for the past month. He'd been on a documented job site out of state. The investigation into him stalled. The cameras, meanwhile, were a dead end. They were a common model sold online for under $30, virtually untraceable. For a week, Mark and Alina lived in a hotel, paralyzed. Their home was a crime scene and a prison. They had the vents sealed, the smoke detectors replaced, a new security system with jamming technology installed at a cost of $15,000. They tried to reclaim their life. But a question, whispered by the technician David, festered in Mark's mind. "The ductwork installs," David had said. "They required access, and not just a screwdriver. You need to know the layout, where the vents lead, how to snake the wires without causing a blockage. That suggests familiarity." One night back in their newly secure bedroom, Mark lay awake. The hum was gone, replaced by the deeper silence of profound distrust. He replayed the timeline. The cameras had battery life of 6 months. They were installed sometime in the last half-year. Colin had been hundreds of miles away for most of that, but someone else had been in their house repeatedly. The HVAC company themselves, the plumber who fixed a leak under the kitchen sink, the electrician who installed the porch light, the cable technician who upgraded their router, the very router the cameras had been piggybacking on. The next morning, Mark did something he would later call a moment of pure instinct. He didn't call the police. He called Leo, the original HVAC technician. He asked one simple question. "When you were in the attic, did you see any other access points? Any panels or ducts that looked newer than the rest?" Leo thought for a moment. "You know, now that you mention it, the flex duct running to the addition over the garage, the one you said you use as a home office. The tape on that junction looked fresh. Different color tape than the original install. I just figured it was a past repair." Mark's home office, where he filed their taxes, where he kept the folder with their mortgage documents, their life insurance policies, his passwords in a locked desk drawer. He walked slowly to the garage, climbed the pull-down ladder to the unfinished storage space. There, amid the insulation, was the silver flex duct, and at the junction, a strip of that same industrial gray tape. With a knife blade trembling in his hand, he sliced the tape and peeled back the duct collar. Inside, not a camera but a small, cylindrical device, a high-gain directional microphone. And this one had a secondary wire running not into the house but down through the wall cavity toward the foundation. Someone wasn't just watching, they were listening for something very specific. And the trail of evidence was pointing away from a stalker ex-boyfriend and toward a much more calculated, much more frightening target, Mark himself. Mark traced the wire from the microphone. It didn't lead outside. It terminated in a small, waterproof box attached to the interior of his home's main electrical panel. Inside was a cellular transmitter. This wasn't just a listening device. It was a live data pipeline, and whoever was on the other end wasn't just eavesdropping on arguments or private moments. They were harvesting specific, actionable intelligence. The office was the target. The bedroom and living room were just the perimeter alarm. He didn't touch it. He called David from Sentinel Security. This time, David's demeanor shifted from professional concern to urgent focus. "A cellular gateway," he said, examining the box via a video call Mark made from the garage. "That changes the profile entirely. Wi-Fi devices have a range limit. This thing operates independently. It could be miles away, in a van, in another building, and still pulling every sound from that microphone. This is next-level tradecraft. You need to understand, this isn't a jealous ex. This is an intelligence-gathering operation." The word *operation hung in the air. Mark's mind raced through his life. He managed regional freight logistics for a mid-sized shipping firm. He wasn't a government official. He didn't work in tech or defense. What could he possibly have that warranted this? David proposed a radical, risky next step, a counter-operation. They would not remove the device. Instead, they would attempt to trace the signal's destination by setting up a parallel detection grid. The cost was prohibitive, another $10,000, but the alternative was living in a cage. Mark authorized it, draining the last of their emergency fund. For 3 days, technicians from Sentinel covertly installed sensors in neighboring homes and on telephone poles within a half-mile radius. They were triangulating the cellular signal's destination. Meanwhile, Mark and Alina performed a grim audit of their digital lives. They changed every password, enabled two-factor authentication on everything, and ran deep malware scans. They found nothing. The violation was entirely physical, rooted in the bones of their house. On the 4th day, David called with a location. The signal was being received at a commercial storage facility on the industrial edge of the city, Unit 214. It was a dead end. The facility required minimal identification to rent a unit, paid in cash. The name on the lease was an obvious alias. The police, presented with this new data, were sympathetic, but their hands were tied. Without a specific suspect caught in the act or evidence of an imminent crime, it was still a trespass and illegal surveillance case, serious, but not a priority for a full tactical response. They promised to add it to the file. Mark felt the walls closing in. The system was designed to protect him, and it was failing. That's when he remembered Leo, the HVAC technician, the fresh tape, the specific knowledge of the ductwork. He called Leo not as a client but as a desperate man. "You see a lot of houses," Mark said. "Did you or anyone at your company service this house in the 6 months before I called you, maybe for the previous owner?" Leo checked the records. The house had been a rental before the Tours bought it. The management company used a different HVAC service, but then Leo paused. "You know, I did do one other job in your neighborhood recently, about 4 months back. A house 2 streets over, different owner, but the request was weird. The guy said he was having air quality tests done and wanted all his vents and ducts professionally cleaned and inspected first, paid in cash. I remember because he followed me around the whole time, asking technical questions about access points and layout." A cold wire tightened in Mark's chest. "Do you remember the address?" Leo gave it to him. Mark drove there that afternoon. It was a well-kept bungalow, no car in the driveway. He sat in his car for an hour watching. No one came or went. He then did something reckless. He walked up to the front door and rang the bell. No answer. He peered through a side window into the garage. It was empty, not just empty of cars, empty of everything. No tools, no boxes, no life. It was a stage set. He went to the county property appraiser's website. The house was owned by an LLC with a name that meant nothing, a shell company. The neighbor, an elderly woman watering her flowers, confirmed his growing dread. "Nice young man," she said, kept to himself. "Moved in about 6 months ago, moved out maybe 3 weeks back. Had a lot of electronic equipment, I think. Saw antennas." The timeline was perfect. The neighbor's description painted a picture of an observation post. The suspect wasn't living 2 states away. He had been living 200 yards away with a direct line of sight to Mark's house, running a sophisticated surveillance operation. And he had vanished 3 weeks ago, right around the time the cameras were discovered. He hadn't fled in panic. He had completed his mission and exfiltrated. Mark's next move was born of pure frustration. He went to the storage facility. He couldn't access Unit 214, but he could watch. For 2 days, he sat in his car, drinking bad coffee, watching the gate. On the afternoon of the second day, a white panel van with no markings pulled up. A man in generic blue coveralls and a baseball cap got out, used a code at the gate, and drove inside. 20 minutes later, he drove out. Mark followed at a distance, his heart hammering against his ribs. The van didn't go to a secret lair. It drove to a corporate office park, a cluster of glass and steel buildings housing tech startups and consulting firms. The van pulled into the underground parking garage of a building called the Meridian Tower. Mark couldn't follow without a pass. He parked across the street, watching the garage exit. The van didn't reappear. He called Alina, his voice shaky with adrenaline. "I think I found their base. It's in an office tower." Alina's response was immediate and terrified. "Mark, stop. Please, come home. This is too big. Let the police handle it." But the police weren't handling it. He was alone in the car, staring at a building that had swallowed the only lead he had. He needed a new angle. If the Who asterisk was locked behind corporate glass, maybe the asterisk Y was hidden in his own past. He took a personal day from work and began a brutal self-interrogation. He went through every project he'd managed in the last 2 years. He looked at every client, every shipping route, every cargo manifest he had access to. It was all mundane: automotive parts, retail goods, agricultural equipment. Nothing screamed national secret. Then he remembered the odd request. 8 months prior, his firm had been subcontracted to handle a series of urgent, high-priority logistics for a biomedical research company called Vital Labs. It wasn't his main account, but he'd overseen the routing for several temperature-controlled shipments of what were labeled as diagnostic reagents. The paperwork was dense, the security protocols tighter than usual, but he'd thought little of it. The contract ended after 3 months. On a hunch, he searched for Vital Labs. The company website was sleek, talking about frontiers in enzymatic synthesis. But deeper search results in the Business News archives told a different story. A year ago, Vital Labs had been at the center of a fierce intellectual property lawsuit. A rival company, Kronos Biomedical, had accused a former Vital scientist of stealing proprietary research on a novel enzyme and fleeing to Vital. The lawsuit was settled out of court for an undisclosed sum. The scientist's name was Dr. Aris Thorne. Mark didn't recognize the name, but the timeline prickled the back of his neck. The lawsuit settlement was around the time his firm started the Vital contract. He pulled up the old shipping logs. The destinations were various Vital facilities, but one address appeared repeatedly: a nondescript warehouse in a nearby commerce park, not listed as a primary Vital site. He mapped it. The warehouse was less than 5 miles from the Meridian Tower. He drove there. The warehouse, Unit B7, looked inactive, but in the parking lot he saw a familiar logo on a discarded shipping pallet. It was the logo of Kronos Biomedical, the rival company that had sued Vital. The pieces, jagged and terrifying, began to form a picture. What if the stolen research wasn't fully contained by the lawsuit? What if Kronos believed Vital was still using it, and that the proof of its use, The specific enzymes, the lab notes, might have been physically transported. And what if someone thought a mid-level logistics manager who routed those shipments might have seen something, or might have kept copies of manifests that could prove it? He was no longer a random victim of a creepy stalker. He was a potential witness in a corporate war worth hundreds of millions of dollars. The surveillance wasn't about his marriage. It was about his work. They were listening for him to mention Vital, Chronos, a shipment, a document. They were waiting for him to lead them to something. He rushed home, bursting in on Alina, who was working at the kitchen table. He laid out his theory, his words tumbling over each other. Her face, already pale from weeks of fear, went ashen. They were listening for business secrets, and they heard everything. Our fights about money, my sister's divorce, our everything. The scale of the collateral damage was immense. Just then, Mark's phone buzzed, an email from an address he didn't recognize. The subject line was blank. The body contained only a link to a private video hosting site and a password. No message. His blood turned to ice. He looked at Alina. It's them. He opened the link on his laptop, entered the password. The video player loaded. The footage was from the living room camera, time-stamped 2 nights ago. He and Alina were on the sofa discussing his plan to follow the van. Their conversation, clear as a bell, played back. They had said the words Meridian Tower Storage Unit, Chronos. They had laid their entire investigation bare. The video ended. A new message popped up in the email thread. Just 5 words. Stop looking, you are exposed. The threat was a mistake. It confirmed everything. They were scared. Mark knew then that he couldn't stop. He had to turn their own surveillance against them. But to do that, he needed to give them exactly what they wanted. He called David from a payphone, laying out a desperate, dangerous plan. They would feed the listeners a story, a fictional piece of evidence that didn't exist, but that their pursuers would be forced to come and collect. The script was simple. Mark would pretend to find an old, forgotten backup drive in a box of his late father's belongings. On it, he would claim, were the original, unredacted shipping manifests from the Vital contract, manifests that listed the exact chemical formulas of the reagents and their true destinations. He and Alina would stage a heated argument in his office, perfectly within range of the microphone, about what to do with this smoking gun. She would want to destroy it. He would insist on taking it to a journalist. They would decide to hide it temporarily in a safe deposit box, whose location they would accidentally discuss. For the plan to work, the surveillance had to stay active. They couldn't remove the microphone. Instead, they had to perform. That night in his office, Mark and Alina had the fight of their lives. It was method acting fueled by real terror. Mark slammed a drawer. I'm not letting this go, Alina. This is proof. This shows Chronos was right. Alina, her voice trembling with genuine fear, pleaded. It's a death sentence. They'll kill us for a piece of plastic. Throw it in the river. They settled on hiding it at a specific branch of their bank in box number 302 until they could think clearly. They gave the bank's address. They mentioned the box required 2 keys, one they had, one at the bank. It was a perfect, tangible lure. The next 48 hours were an agony of waiting. Sentinel Security had teams covertly watching the bank, the house, and the storage facility. David's theory was that the operatives would move quickly to intercept the drive before it could be handed over. They would need to either steal the key, forge authorization, or coerce a bank employee. Every possibility was a potential trap. But the watchers were watching the watchers. On the second day, the white panel van was spotted again, not at the bank, but circling the neighborhood. It parked 3 blocks away. A man in a utility worker's vest got out, carrying a tool bag. He walked directly to the Tor's house, not to the front door, but to the side gate, heading for the backyard. David's team, monitoring from a van down the street, radioed a warning. This was a breach. They were coming to retrieve the key, or to plant additional surveillance, or worse. Mark and Alina were in the living room pretending to watch a movie. The alert buzzed on Mark's phone. Subject approaching rear yard. Stand by. His blood ran cold. The plan was for a bank heist, not a home invasion. He motioned to Alina. They had a safe room, a reinforced closet in the master bedroom. They were about to move when the doorbell rang. Not the back door, the front door. They froze. The doorbell rang again, followed by a firm, official knock. Mark looked through the peephole. A man and a woman in dark suits stood on his porch. The woman held up a badge and ID wallet to the lens, Federal Bureau of Investigation. Mark opened the door, his mind reeling. The female agent introduced herself as Special Agent Miller. Her partner was Agent Cross. "Mr. Torres, we need to speak with you. It's about a matter of corporate espionage and illegal surveillance. We believe you are a victim and a material witness." They were ushered inside. Agent Miller got straight to the point. They had been monitoring a private intelligence firm called Grayson Solutions, suspected of conducting illegal corporate espionage for several biotechnology clients, including Kronos Biomedical. The FBI's cyber division had intercepted fragments of the firm's communications, which led them to the Torres residence. They were aware of the surveillance devices. They were also aware of Mark's recent, extracurricular investigations. "You led them on a merry chase, Mr. Torres," Agent Cross said, almost admiringly. "But you're in over your head. The man who approached your yard, he's a former Special Forces operative turned corporate spy. His name is Kale. He wasn't coming for a key. He was coming to install a GPS tracker on your car and a keylogger on your home network. Your little performance about the bank. They didn't buy it for a second. They ran a background check on your father. He died 5 years ago. He was a school teacher. He never owned a backup drive." Mark felt the floor drop out from under him. His clever trap was transparent. They had been playing him the entire time. Agent Miller leaned forward. "We want to make a deal. We want you to wear a wire. We want you to arrange a real meeting with Kale or his handler. You tell them you got scared, that you want to sell the real manifests, the ones we will provide for cash and a guarantee of safety. We'll be there. We'll take them down, and in exchange, you and your wife get witness protection, a new start." It was the only way out. Mark agreed. The FBI technicians worked quickly. They implanted a subcutaneous microphone and transmitter in his arm. They gave him a burner phone and a script. The bait was a single digital file, an encrypted fragment of a real Vital Labs shipping manifest that the FBI had obtained through a separate subpoena. It was genuine, and it was damning. The call was made from a park bench. Mark's voice was shaky but convincing. "I have the file, the one you've been looking for. I want $200,000 in cash, and guarantees. I hand it over, you dismantle your equipment, and you disappear forever." The voice on the other end, distorted, agreed. The meeting was set for the next night at a decommissioned freight loading dock on the river, a place with clear sightlines, multiple exits, and no witnesses. The night of the meeting was cold and damp. Mark drove alone, the FBI tracking his every move from 3 unmarked vehicles. Agents with sniper rifles were positioned on nearby rooftops. The dock was a skeleton of rusted metal under a sliver of moon. He stood by his car, a briefcase in hand, heart hammering against his ribs. A black SUV with tinted windows rolled silently out of the shadows. It stopped 20 yards away. The passenger door opened. Kale, the man from the neighborhood, stepped out. He was alone. He walked forward empty-handed. This was wrong. The deal was for an exchange. "Where's the money?" Mark called out, his voice echoing. Kale stopped 10 feet away. He smiled, a cold, thin line. "There is no money, Mark. There's just a lesson." He raised his hand, and in it was a small electronic device, a signal jammer. He pressed a button. In the FBI command van, Agent Miller watched as Mark's subcutaneous transmitter flatlined. All audio feeds went dead. The GPS tracker on his car blinked out. They had been anticipated and neutralized. "Move in, now," she yelled into her radio. But before the FBI cars could surge forward, high-powered lights exploded to life from the upper floors of the abandoned warehouse overlooking the dock, blinding the snipers and the approaching agents. From the back of the SUV, 2 figures emerged. Not more operatives. They were hooded, their hands bound. The hoods were pulled off. It was Alina and Leo, the HVAC technician. Cale's voice cut through the chaos. "Federal agents, hold your positions, or these two die right now." He held a pistol loosely at his side, pointed at the ground between the hostages. Mark's world shattered. They hadn't been following him. They had been following Alina. They had connected Leo to his inquiries. They had taken them both. The entire meeting was a counterambush. The FBI's operation was compromised, and they were now in a standoff with a professional who held all the leverage. Agent Miller's voice boomed from a loudspeaker. "Release the hostages. You're surrounded." Cale didn't flinch. He looked directly at Mark. "The file, now, or I put a bullet in your wife's knee, then the technician, and we see how long you want to play." Mark was paralyzed. The briefcase contained nothing but blank paper. The real file was with the FBI. He had nothing to trade. He had led everyone into a trap, and now Alina's life was the price. He had one choice left, a choice that would burn every bridge and launch him into a war with no rules. He dropped the briefcase and raised his hands. "The file isn't here," he shouted, his voice raw. "It's in a cloud locker. The password is in my head. You let them go and I'll give it to you. You take me instead." Cale studied him for a long, terrifying moment. Then he nodded to his associates. Alina and Leo were shoved forward, stumbling toward the FBI perimeter. Cale grabbed Mark by the arm, shoved him into the back of the SUV, and slammed the door. The vehicle peeled away into the maze of industrial streets, leaving the FBI scrambling, the hostages safe, and Mark Torres in the hands of the very people who had turned his home into a panopticon. The game was over. Now the real interrogation would begin. The SUV didn't go to a secret facility. It drove for 20 minutes and stopped at a private airfield. A small jet waited on the tarmac. This wasn't an interrogation, it was an extraction. Cale pushed Mark up the stairs and into a leather seat. The door sealed. As the jet began to taxi, a man emerged from the forward cabin. He was in his 50s, wearing a crisp sweater and glasses. He looked like a university professor. "Mr. Torres, my name is Aris Thorne," he said, extending a hand Mark didn't take. The name hit him like a physical blow. Dr. Aris Thorne, the scientist at the heart of the Vital Chronos lawsuit, the man accused of stealing the research. "I apologize for the dramatic methods, but you left us no choice. The FBI's involvement complicated a delicate situation." Mark found his voice fueled by adrenaline and rage. "You had cameras in my bedroom. You terrorized my wife. You kidnapped us. That's not delicate. That's monstrous." Thorne sighed, taking a seat opposite him. "The cameras were never about you or your wife. They were about me. Let me explain. The research I pioneered at Chronos wasn't just proprietary. It was a breakthrough in stable enzyme transport. It could revolutionize how we deliver targeted therapies. Chronos intended to weaponize it for military contracts. I couldn't let that happen. I took my work to Vital, who promised ethical development. The lawsuit was a smokescreen. Chronos didn't want the research back. They wanted to erase it, and me with it." He explained that he'd gone into hiding, protected by Vital's security. But Chronos had hired Grayson Solutions to find him. Their investigation led them to the logistics chain. They believed Thorne had physically smuggled core data crystals out via the shipments Mark had routed. They were watching Mark's house, listening to his office, not for corporate secrets, but for any clue that might lead them to Thorne's new lab location. They were waiting for a slip, a mention of a place, a person. "The FBI has it wrong," Thorne said. "They think Grayson works for Chronos. They do, but only on the surface. Grayson's real client is a private equity group that holds a controlling interest in both Chronos and Vital. They don't care who wins. They want to consolidate the asset, my research, and eliminate the liability, me. They were using your home as bait in a trap for me. When you started investigating, you became a loose end. Their orders changed from surveillance to cleanup." Mark's mind reeled. He and Alina were never the targets. They were collateral damage in a corporate assassination plot. "So why am I here? Why not just clean me up at the dock?" "Because you have a federal file now," Cale said from the cockpit doorway. Disappearing a material witness under FBI protection creates a hurricane of heat, but a witness who voluntarily gets on a plane with a known fugitive, who flees the country, that's a problem that solves itself. You'll be found in a few months, dead in a cheap hotel in another country, with evidence you were trying to sell stolen data. Case closed. The plan was elegant and cruel. They weren't just going to kill him. They were going to use his death to discredit Thorne and wrap the entire investigation in a bow. The jet was climbing, pressing Mark into his seat. He was being flown to his own murder. He thought of Alina, safe with the FBI. He thought of the subcutaneous transmitter, now dead. But then he remembered something David from Sentinel had said during the initial sweep. The best counter-surveillance, David had told him, is sometimes just a second, dumber system, something so obvious they'd never look for it. On the day the FBI implanted their high-tech mic, Mark, paranoid beyond reason, had also taken a $20 prepaid phone, activated a voice recording app, set it to transmit live audio to a cloud account, and sealed it inside a hollowed-out hardcover book on his office shelf. It was a child's trick, a last-resort failsafe. He had never turned it off. As Thorne laid out their destination, a small country with no extradition, Mark made a decision. He started talking, loudly. He confessed to everything Thorne was saying, but he framed it as a confession to his own crimes. "So let me get this straight," Mark said, his voice clear and aimed toward the window as if addressing the world. "You, Dr. Thorne, stole the research. You used my shipping logs to hide the data crystals. You promised me a cut to keep quiet. And now we're running because the FBI and Kronos are both after us. And your man Cale here is going to set us up in a new lab once we land. Is that the plan?" Thorne looked confused, then alarmed. "What are you doing?" "I'm making sure the record is clear," Mark said, locking eyes with him. "For the podcast, the one I've been streaming from my office since the FBI showed up. You didn't think I'd come completely unprepared, did you?" It was a bluff, a desperate, wild bluff, but the mention of a live stream from his office, the very room they had so thoroughly bugged, made Cale move. He lunged toward Mark, but Thorne held up a hand. "Wait." He studied Mark's face. He saw no fear, only cold calculation. The bluff worked because it was rooted in their own paranoia. They had surveilled him so completely, the idea he might have a second, primitive system they'd missed was psychologically plausible. "Turn this plane around," Thorne said quietly to Cale. "We can't, the flight plan." "Turn it around," Thorne shouted. "Land somewhere in the US. Anywhere. Drop him off. If there's even a 1% chance this is being recorded, the entire strategy collapses." A tense negotiation began in midair. Mark played his hand with nothing in it. He promised that if they landed and let him go, the stream would end, and he would tell the FBI he acted alone, under duress. He would become a useless, confused witness. Thorne, whose primary goal was to disappear, agreed. The jet diverted to a small regional airport in a neighboring state. As they descended, Cale leaned close to Mark. "This isn't over. We'll be watching, always." Mark met his gaze. "I know, but next time I find a camera in my vent, I'll know who to thank." He was dumped on the tarmac at 3 in the morning. The jet took off into the darkness. He walked to a gas station, called the FBI, and was picked up an hour later. The aftermath was a whirlwind of sealed indictments and non-disclosure agreements. Based on Mark's testimony and the evidence the FBI already had, a raid on Grayson Solutions uncovered the full scope of the operation. Kronos Biomedical settled with the government for a record sum, and several executives were charged with conspiracy. The private equity group was investigated but shielded by layers of corporate structure. Dr. Aris Thorne vanished permanently. Mark and Alina entered the witness protection program. They were given new identities, a new home in a small town far away. The government bought their house and it was quietly demolished. There was no trial, no public victory, just a file stamped closed. But here is the final surprising detail. A year later, a package arrived at a post office box marked checked monthly. no return address. Inside was a single, unmarked USB drive. On it was one file, a video. It showed the empty lot where their old house had stood. The camera panned to a new "for sale" sign posted on the grassy plot. Then a man's hand entered the frame and placed a small, black object, a pinhole camera, on the back of the sign, pointing at the empty space where the bedroom would have been. The video ended. It was a message, not a threat, a receipt, a statement that the infrastructure of watching remained, waiting for the next life to be built upon it. The surveillance wasn't about them personally. It was a permanent feature of the landscape, a symptom of a world where trust had been hollowed out and sold as a security upgrade. Mark destroyed the drive. He never told Alina. Some truths are too heavy to share. They had their safety, they had each other, and they had the certain chilling knowledge that the feeling of being watched was no longer a paranoia. It was a simple fact of modern life. The vents, the clocks, the chargers, they were all potential eyes, and the only defense was to know that the invasion wasn't personal. It was just business. So what happened to Mark and Alina Torres is not an isolated horror story. It is a blueprint, a map of how intimate space can be weaponized, not just by jealous partners, but by corporations, by private spies, by anyone with a few $100s and a specific target. The statistics we mentioned at the start are not abstract. 1 in 4 women, 1 in 7 men, a find rate that has quadrupled in a generation. These numbers are people living with a low hum in the walls they cannot explain. The terrifying truth is that the Torres case sits at a crossroads. It embodies the classic, psychologically devastating intimate partner surveillance, the ex-boyfriend, the fear, the control. But it also reveals the new frontier, the corporate takeover of that same invasive toolkit. The same pinhole camera sold online to stalk an ex can be bought in bulk by a firm like Grayson Solutions to stalk a scientist, or a witness, or a competitor. The technology is neutral. The intent is what transforms a home into a panopticon. Mark and Alina's story had a resolution of sorts, safety through disappearance, a new life under new names, but most victims never get that. They live with the lingering doubt, the repaired vent, the replaced smoke detector, never knowing if every device is just a device or if it is an eye. The law struggles to keep pace. A camera in a bedroom is illegal. A camera in a living room vent might be a trespass. Proving who put it there and why is a labyrinth. The final message on that USB drive, the camera placed on the empty lot, is the most important lesson of all. It signifies that the surveillance was never truly about Mark and Alina. They were the temporary occupants of a monitored space. The system itself remains. The infrastructure of watching is persistent, waiting for the next occupants, the next source of data, the next transaction. Our homes are no longer castles. They are potential data farms, and our private lives are the crop. This leaves us with a single, unsettling question. In a world where the tools of intrusion are cheaper and more invisible than ever, how do we build trust? Not just in our partners, but in the very walls that shelter us. The answer might not be in finding every camera. It might be in understanding that the feeling of being watched is no longer a symptom of paranoia, but a rational assessment of modern risk. Our only true defense is awareness. To know that the threat is real, that it is growing, and that it can come from anywhere, even from a routine service call about a noisy fan. If you found this deep dive into the hidden world of surveillance compelling, make sure to subscribe. We unravel the true stories behind the everyday fears, one hidden thread at a time. Thanks for watching.